politics tonight, digging beyond the headlines. And now to our interview with the guest of the day. I am now joined by the Executive Director of YIAGA Africa, Samson Itodo. He is an expert in political inclusion, electoral integrity, and public accountability. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, and good evening.
Good evening to you. All right. Now, your group, YIAGA Africa, was one of the election observers in Osun State. Tell me, how will you describe that election?
Well, the Osun elections, and for that election, YIAGA Africa deployed observers to a random sample of polling units, and we deployed the parallel vote tabulation methodology, which is a methodology that monitors and tracks information on the process of the election as well as the result. And because we use the PVT, which is the parallel vote tabulation, we're able to determine the accuracy of results declared by INEC for elections. And the PVT is a standard election observation methodology that has been used across different countries in the world and for over 50 years. And what was our assessment of that election? We did speak about the process of the election and then also its outcome. And based on our official position, which was made known in the public, we did say that INEC's official results fell within the PVT estimate. And to that extent, the results declared by INEC were accurate and they were a reflection of the votes cast at the polling unit. And that was our position on the elections. Also in the Osun elections, we deployed the Election Results Analysis Dashboard, which is the ERAD, and that monitored and tracked results uploaded on the INEC election results viewing portal. And when we looked at those results and also looked at the process, we did come to a conclusion that the outcome of that election was indeed a reflection of what we observed at the polling unit. So we stand by our PVT figures based on our observation. But again, you can see what has actually come out of that election, because quite frankly, INEC did perform creditably well in the Osun elections. It was a marked improvement. There was strict compliance with provisions of the Electoral Act and INEC's guidelines. But we can't say that the election wasn't also fraught with some level of inconsistencies and challenges. But these challenges and inconsistencies were not significant to impugn on the integrity of the outcome of the election. And that's our position. And this position was clearly stated in the report that we issued on the Osun elections.
All right, so based on your observation and assessments, what is your view about the Osun Election Petitions Tribunal judgment?
I think there are a few things that we need to note, and also a few things that are quite troubling and disturbing. And I'll just base this on the provisions of the Electoral Act. So first, the Act clearly defines what overvoting is, as well as the consequence of overvoting. And the law is very clear that overvoting occurs when the total number of votes cast in a polling unit exceeds the total number of accredited voters in those polling units. And once there's overvoting, what you have is cancellation of the votes in those particular polling units. And for a returning officer to make a return, he must ensure that the total number of people who collected their PVC in polling units where elections were cancelled must not exceed the margin of lead between the top two candidates. If the total number of people who collected their PVCs from the polling units exceed the margin of lead, then that election should be declared inconclusive. The second one deals with the BVAS. And what is quite troubling, as so many people have mentioned, that the Osun judgment questions the integrity of the BVAS. And that is far from the truth. In fact, the BVAS and its credibility was enhanced by this entire judgment and judicial process for two reasons. One, the BVAS is able to detect if there has been overvoting, whether people voted without accreditation. And so it is important that members of the public and voters know that they must be accredited with the BVAS on election day if their vote is going to count. So they must also insist that they are accredited using the BVAS. And so that was what happened. And I say this, and we have gone back to check within our sample, within also, the number of polling units where there was a claim that overvoting occurred. And we did actually observe that there were consistencies, with the results, official results and final results declared by INEC. So if you look at the case, there are three different reports of accreditation from the BVAS. The first one was the one that was issued by INEC, and that was the first, and I'll call it the provisional report of the number of accredited voters. There was a second one, and this second one is the final number of accredited voters based on the reports from the BVAS, because the BVAS are not synchronized fully when one of the parties requested for CTC of the BVAS. And then in the course of the proceeding, the court subpoenaed all the BVAS, requested for the BVAS, from those particular polling units. And when the court checked the data on the BVAS, there was a consistency with the primary source, which is the BVAS, as well as the final report released by INEC on the number of accredited voters. But how come the judges ignored, the reports on the primary source of accreditation data, which is the BVAS, and then relied on the preliminary, or what I would call the provisional report on their number of accredited voters? And so these are some of the issues that are coming up from this. But the big question, and where I think INEC should have done better, was when it was issuing the first report, it should have indicated that these are provisional, subject to synchronization or update of the data, because we know how the BVAS actually works and its function. And I think members of the public need to know that this judgment does not in any way question the integrity of the BVAS, because the function of the BVAS is to accredit, authenticate and verify that a voter's name is on the register, as well as their biometrics. So both their fingerprints and their facials ought to be accredited. And I would say that for me and for us at YIAGA Africa, this entire process clearly shows the power that the BVAS has. But we must also be careful so that polling officials on election day record the actual number of accredited voters on the BVAS on the result sheet.
All right, Mr. Samson, we will definitely get to that. But I'm wondering if other election observers noticed all of these discrepancies, why didn't anyone raise the alarm earlier?
No, the big question is, what discrepancies are you referring to? If you go check, the YIAGA Africa report, we're very clear, about some of the procedural shortcomings. It's identified, it's highlighted in our report. But the question is, was it substantial enough to impact on the overall outcome? And quite frankly, based on our data, based on our findings, it wasn't substantial to affect the overall outcome of the election. And the report is out there in the public domain. But we highlighted issues relating to one, we talked about violence, we talked about inconsistencies in the application of the guidelines. We also talked about cases where BVAS malfunctioned and they weren't replaced. It's there in our report. We talked about incidents of violence. There were several issues we identified, in our report. But then the big question is, was it widespread? Was it substantial to impact on the outcome of the elections? And quite frankly, it wasn't substantial based on the findings, YIAGA Africa's findings, on the elections.
All right, then if you're just joining us, I have the Executive Director of YIAGA Africa, Samson Itodo, and we're looking at Osun State Tribunal verdict and electoral integrity in Nigeria. At the moment, we'll go for a commercial break and we'll be right back with more analysis. Please stay with us.